Welcome everyone to For All to Hear. My name is Rebecca Haas and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Pacific Opera Victoria. And today I'm delighted to welcome Rich Coburn to our platform, For All to Hear. Rich is a freelance pianist, vocal coach, organist, arranger, and a composer. But he's here today to talk to us about another of his projects because he is the leader of the BIPOC Voices project. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks so
Nice to
much for
see
having me,
you.
Rebecca.
This is a fascinating project to me. Obviously, in my mind, it's going to be an invaluable resource, but why don't you tell people a little bit about this project that you're working on and what it's meant to achieve?
Sure. So, BIPOC Voices is a resource to help opera companies, orchestras, chamber groups, individuals find and program more works for solo voices and instruments by BIPOC composers. So that can be opera, oratorio, it could be more like musical theater, it might be vocal chamber music, not art song because resources for those exist, but any sort of other works for solo voices and instruments.
So I've given your bio, so you're obviously a musician yourself,
Mhm.
but this is sort of a little more than I have an interest in assisting people in finding repertoire. This is a larger undertaking. What sparked you to create a project of this size?
Well, I don't know if anything sparked me to create a project of this size, but I'll tell you how I got involved. Um, so I guess a little bit over a year ago, or a year and a half ago almost, um, COVID was going on. Most of the work that I normally do wasn't happening. So I was getting government checks and playing around with things to try to figure out what I could do with myself, what I could learn, where there were opportunities. And yeah, I sort of got involved in playing with MIDI, which, for some of your listeners, MIDI can mean a lot of things, and it might mean to some people like Mario Brothers in the 80s type sound, which is MIDI. But today it's evolved a lot, and, a lot of the film and video game scores that you hear are composed with MIDI. So it's basically just electronically composed or controlled instruments. So I started playing around with that, discovered that there was this piece of software that I really, really wanted to play around with. It could do these great orchestral instruments. It was fantastic. It cost a lot of money, and since I was not making any money, well, I mean, I was making a little bit of money, but I didn't have a job. I wasn't going to buy it, and I found this grant that I could use to apply for projects. So I thought, what sort of project can I build that's gonna where I can get this thing, I can learn how to use it, and I can do something that's useful. It's not just for myself, but it's going to benefit other people. And so at this point in the pandemic, a lot of people were doing online concerts. So I thought, okay, maybe we can do an online concert. And then we started to figure out like what life could it have beyond the concert, and maybe there could be like a repository of like works by BIPOC people. And then as I started digging into this more, I just realized that there was this huge hole actually in the resources. There are works for um, I think there's choral. I know that there's art song. There's like various sorts of like sort of wind band. There's some stuff orchestral. There might be a little bit of stuff, but there was no resource that was large enough that you could go to it and know you were going to find what you were looking for. Right? So there wasn't something that actually could be extremely helpful to people who are looking to program this music. And so I sort of decided that was the direction I wanted to go in. Of course, I had no idea how big the project was going to be when that happened. I thought it was going to be maybe 13% as large as it actually is. But uh, and so one of the things that we're doing at BIPOC Voices right now, we have a prototype website up, and I should just mention if people want to check it out, it's morebipocvoices.com. So more BIPOC voices.com. And there are works by 42 composers in there right now, about 159 works. But 59% of the composers that are in the prototype right now have no works for solo voices and instruments. Like they have no recordings of works for solo voices and instruments. So suppose you found someone, you didn't know them, you thought this is a wonderful looking composer, I'd love to program them, maybe I want to know a bit more. There'd be no way to hear their vocal writing for instruments. So the tie-in between these two things is that we're making demo recordings with MIDI orchestra and with live singers, so that not only can people know about who more of these composers are and see what they're writing, but they can actually engage with the music more fully, and they can see if it moves them, and they can see if it speaks to what they want to be putting in front of their audiences and their public. Um, yeah, so I guess that was the sort of long story of how I got into this project.
I do kind of, I mean, a number of programs, including this one. These are really born of the pandemic, a very unusual, unpredictable time, placing us as artists in surprising places with surprising opportunities. But what a beautiful thing to come out of this, especially considering in the last 2 years. This has really been at the front of the conversation for many arts organizations, is this desire to diversify programming. I think both because of the murder of George Floyd and absolutely because of reconciliation. And so I often, as a mixed European Métis woman, I often have singers email me and ask me for Métis composition. And you're quite right. People don't know where to go. I think singers try to talk to each other, but we don't have a lot of resource. And I know working at Pacific Opera, it is a question that patrons ask. They're saying, well, yes, we want to see works by different people, but the first question, surprisingly to me, is often being, do these even exist? So it really does speak to the lack of profile for composers who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and that we aren't used to seeing these works, and we really don't know where to find them. So this really leads me to the other obvious question, which is, how are you finding them? Because I think, I've said to you, I basically sort of put odd Google search words in and kind of hope for a lucky hit. We all play with jumbling the order, but how have you been tackling this, and what have you been able to lean into to find these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to take it one step back and say, first of all, do they exist? Um, you know, they, I have been able to find some people. One of the things that happened early on is I spoke to many composers, to BIPOC composers, and I said, I want to make these demos. Is that something that would be interesting to you? And a lot of people said yes, and there was great support. So I put out a call, and I sort of advertised it as wide. I posted it on every place that I could find to put it, I put it. And not that many people applied. And I was really surprised because I expected, based on the response of the composers, that people were going to say, oh, this is great, I get a free demo of my piece, so like, sure, and they would submit their stuff to the database. So then the question became, what does that data point mean? And what I think it means is that the composers that I'm looking for are not hanging out in the places that I was sort of lazily expecting them to be hanging out in, the online places. And, to give a recent example, there was a bunch of hype about Fire Shut Up in My Bones that went on at the Met recently, and Terence Blanchard. And, Terence Blanchard is famous for writing a ton of movie scores and for winning Grammys playing jazz. And opera is kind of like his side project. He's written, I think, 2 operas. And so if you're looking for, that's just one example, but if you're looking for somebody who has an immense creative potential and who is an artist at the highest level and who wants to be creating these works but hasn't been invited into the opera space or anything near the opera space, the question just becomes, which way have they gone? And so then you have to look, are they in music theater? Are they in jazz? Are they in film scores? Are they in sort of more indie underground type places? Are they, these are some of the obvious choices, but I'm sure that I'm going to keep discovering as I go on more. So the actual answer to your question, how do I find people, is that I just keep my eyes open, and every time I see anything on social media about a work or composer that I don't know, I add them to a list, and then I just spend a lot of time Googling. And, I don't see the job of BIPOC Voices as necessarily to go out and find all of these people. But one of the things I have noticed is that a lot of people are interested in doing this sort of work and are doing it a little bit by themselves, because it's a lot of work, even just to go, even when you have a name and they have a website and there's information on it, just to go and mine all that information and put it in a usable, like, in a database type of form and make sure you've got everything right and link to recordings. For one composer, that can take 45 minutes, when everything is set up and ready to go. And you don't have to go digging around on publishers' sites, and you don't have to, um, so yeah, it's a lot of work. And I think that what I would really like to see is all of the people who are doing this, all the companies who do a work. One of my goals for this year is to set up a system so that this automatically gets fed into my, to research list. Um, and, of course, I'm going to keep looking on my own. But as you said, it's sort of, what do you type? It's, it's
Yes.
so
What do we
it's a
type?
little
What
bit
do
of
we
luck
think the
to
keywords are?
exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I hope that's answered your question.
Well, maybe it also gives me a chance to say to you, I mean, this is your chance to make a call out to people. If people have works, composers, things they would love to submit to you, is there a way for them to do that? Because, whether we can actually, hopefully, that's part of my hope in this interview, is to really encourage people to be in touch with you and share information, and more of us can pitch in. So it's not just a one-man show, right? It's a lot of work, as you
Right.
say. If people want to send you things or be in touch with you about this, do they do this through the website? Is that best? Or what are you
Absolutely.
looking for?
On the website, there's a button, up in the top right corner, I think, that says submit a work or submission or something like that. And you click there, there's a whole form. It's got a ton of different fields, but none of them are mandatory. So if you literally just know the first and last name of a composer and that they wrote something, but that's all you can write that and submit it. If you have, the date of the first performance and the full orchestration, all that, I'm happy for you to submit that. But if you just have a title and you can't even remember who wrote it, but you just write that and submit it, it's going to get added to my list automatically. If I've already got it, then it won't be duplicated. That's fine. But if I haven't heard of it, because most of the works and most of the composers I still haven't had a chance to look at and research and catalog, that's a really, really helpful way actually to help this project and this idea move forward.
And what kind of a reaction have you had from people inside of our industry? What is the appetite looking like from, I'm sure, solo performers or companies? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in North America, there's a lot of people are wanting this. A lot of people are talking to me about this. A lot of people have offered to help me when I've had a chance to meet with them and talk with them, and said, what can we do? And we're looking for this, and it sort of ranges from, I want this. I'm not quite sure how to move forward, but it's something I wish I could happen more easily. And let's be honest, there's a lot of legitimate barriers to programming these composers right now. To, I'm highly involved in this, and I'm so happy that you are doing this in a more systematic way. And let's see what synergies my efforts and your efforts might be able to have. And I'm sure there's people that aren't that interested in it, but I've got so much positive feedback actually from people sort of across the industry, and as I say, particularly in Canada and the States. Right now, there's a lot of excitement I find when I talk to people.
I think I also want to circle back to, you mentioned Terence Blanchard and Fire Shut Up My Bones, and thinking about genre. And I'm really sort of fascinated by this idea of how do we find people, especially when, classical music is a very Eurocentric, obviously, tradition, and like a 350-year kind of range is what we tend to be pulling from. Um, do you think that's something we're actually going to start to see, is the genre of opera perhaps opening up, even in its definition, that actually will welcome more people and will, because it's interesting, the music theater argument is always, Sondheim is considered to be the classical version of Broadway. So that question of what is opera, what is not opera, is that maybe a benefit of this process, is to start to open up what that definition is? Just sort of curious about your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'll give you two answers. The BIPOC Voices answer is that I'm trying to not discriminate or exclude. If we get a large body of work and then I hear from people, none of us are really interested in programming that, then that's the point that we might try to start to cut things down. But at this point, I'm very open, and I try not to even use the word opera too much. And I try to be deliberate about saying works for solo voices and instruments, which includes electronic instruments, by the way. My personal view is that there's not, I mean, it's so difficult to try to put boundaries around anything which is artistic and creative that I just don't see. I mean, I see a practical point if you yourself are programming for an opera company saying this is what we're interested in doing and this is what we're not interested in doing. But it's not because of where the limitations of opera are, it's because of the limitations you want to put on your company, which is totally fine. Of course, you have the right to do that. In terms of what counts as opera, I mean, yeah, I am willing to take a very, very broad definition. And, in terms of music theater, I don't really think of them as different. Like they're stylistically different, but you know, the training is different. You put a music theater person in an opera or an opera person in music theater and they might struggle, but it's not because the art is fundamentally different. It's just because there's different sets of expectations around them. So there are practical reasons like not to stray too far from what you're built for or accustomed to maybe, but in terms of the actual art, no, I don't. I think that, you know, there is a lot of um, white supremacy baked into a lot of opera, right? And some of it is kind of subtle and some of it's not subtle at all. And so if you're asking people, if you're trying to attract more composers, and the ultimate goal of this is to also be attracting more artists and more audience and all this stuff, and you're trying to do those people, but you're trying to keep a narrow definition of what opera is. Even if you're writing new opera that sounds like that opera, it sort of represents something. It just doesn't make any sense to me to sort of try to keep things too narrow.
So, having heard this answer, I'm curious about the undiscovered gems you've come across. I mean, is there something you found in your research so far that's a piece of music that's really sticking out to you that you're carrying and you'd love to promote? We can go search it on the website.
Yeah, I mean, actually, as I'm researching people, if they have like a SoundCloud page or a YouTube page or something, I usually go and listen to it, even if it's just archival recordings or whatever, to get some sort of sense of what the music is, because otherwise it would be extremely academic for me and I would have no real connection to what's going on. Um, and I found a bunch of really interesting stuff. I think one of my favorite things, a piece that I've really got into, is a piece that we're building a demo for, and we're just finishing it up. I mean, actually, I think like this weekend or early next week, it's gonna be done. It's by a composer who I think just graduated from the University of Toronto, named Kento Stratford. And the piece is called Constellations, and it's this very, very beautiful piece. And for me, this is particularly enjoyable because I was programming the orchestra for it, or the ensemble, and so I was sort of like getting to take part in this creative process, and you really are. It's just like if you're rehearsing something, you're really living in the piece, and you're tweaking all the details. You're really sort of getting down to the nitty gritty. It was a beautiful piece, and the demo will be up on the website reasonably soon. So yeah, I mean that was just one of the things, but I think there's so much good stuff. There's some of the composers that are less known because they have less experience, and then there are some composers who are actually very experienced and just not that well known. And different companies and different people in different positions will be looking for different ones of these composers, but there's really a wide gamut of what I found so far, and some very, 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 very beautiful and inspiring stuff.
I feel like you're a bit like an archaeologist. You're out sort of lifting rocks and sort of digging and then finding these things. And then I love that there's something creatively rewarding too. Absolutely putting together those recordings and understanding the composer's mind inside of the voicing of the instruments. Sounds extremely rewarding. I'm glad because I'm still sort of daunted by the immenseness of the project. You want to tell me a little bit about your partners who are supporting this? I'm sort of curious who's allied around you. I think there's some information on the website, but if you would
Yeah,
share
there
those
is.
people who are pitching in.
Yeah, so the first one is a Music Academy of the West who gave me the grant to start the project in the first place. And they are supporting like a number of really interesting projects, and they have this award, Alumni Enterprise Award, which they give out every year. So that's excellent. And they support all of these grantees not just with money, but with sort of entrepreneurial training and with mentorship and all this stuff. So it's fantastic. Um, The Association for Opera in Canada and Opera America have both been helping me a lot. Um, and in various ways, with connections, with project advising. There's a lot of really good stuff that they have been doing and helpful and ways of being helpful. The Canadian Music Center, the BC Center particularly, has been helping me, especially when I was trying to reach out to composers earlier. And you know, various individuals have also, I've been talking to them about it, and they say, like, is there a way that I can get involved? Is there, is something that can happen? One of the things that I'm hoping to do this year is I've been focusing on opera in the first year just because that's the area that I know better, but I'm really wanting to move more into orchestras, not at the expense of operas, but just because it's actually easier, I think, for an orchestra to program one piece, a 10-minute work or something, and get it on the stage faster. And also, there's tons of them. So, there's like so many more orchestras and opera companies. So so one of the things for this series is to go out actually and keep developing those partnerships and find who the people are in some of the areas that I haven't had a chance to get into in any sort of detailed way yet.
Well, that answers that question of what's coming up next. I can see where the focus is moving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also curious. I mean, you have a full life as an artist outside of this. You are a collaborative pianist, right? You have your own projects, your compositional works. How much of your life has this eaten, and how are you balancing it coming out of COVID? Because we are actually starting to live perform again. I'm wondering how you're going to balance all of this.
Yeah, as a future, I don't know, but you know, it's been I've been lucky to be doing some performing ever since, in April I started doing some performing, and I'm working with this fantastic singer named Geneviève Leclerc, who's a sort of pop type singer, and we've got this show that we've been touring around, which has been a lot of fun and which has kept me sort of on the stage. In even though some things are starting up in the classical world, I haven't been that busy with that yet, which has actually been fine because I got so busy with so many other things as the pandemic came on. And so I kind of, this project this year has probably taken up, I don't know, 30% of my work time, I'd say. Next year, I'm applying for a bunch more funding, and I actually hope that it will take up 50 or 60% of my work time, because my goal for this next year is to really get it over the hump that there are enough composers, there are enough administrators, there's enough knowledge that it sort of starts to generate some of its own momentum. And then after that, once we get past that hump, then my involvement might be able to trail off a little bit, as the thing starts to be able to run on its own feet a little bit. So I don't know how that's going to work going forward. It's every time that somebody asks me what I do right now, I stop and blink. And I don't know what to tell them. So I guess that's a to be discovered. We'll have to leave it in that category.
It's the life of the freelancer, right? You always
Yeah.
have, I think I used to say I had 5 or 6 things that I was juggling, and there's always one thing coming to fruition while you're sort of getting something else started, and something's in mid-project, and it's always a juggle for sure.
Hmm.
I totally understand that. Well, I think this is going to have just a huge life to it, because there is just so much pent-up need, demand. And I think, I absolutely hear your artist's call to this. I understand as a musician, right, the curation of music, and just as a musician, my recognition that I need new composition moving forward. I love what we have from before, but that it can't be the end. Like, it's not painting. We're not painting anymore because Picasso came along. We want to keep going, right? But the other piece that is a part of my life, and I'm curious how it impacts your journey, is, the more visible I am as a Métis, the more my race is part of my identity and my walk as a musician, the more I also feel, I would say, well, people come to me, but I do feel responsibility, that there's a role for me to play. How personal is this project for you? Because you're also a mixed race person.
Yeah, identity is such a, I could talk to you for an hour just about my own personal journey with identity. Um, it's become more important to me recently. I guess, um, growing up, I was not um, I wouldn't say I was not aware of my race, but living in Canada and I grew up in the interior of British Columbia where like it was full of hippies in the town that I lived in Nelson and like there was not racism. Like there was at least there was not anything that would be close to overt racism, right? That I would struggle to find an instant from my childhood that could be related to that. Um, I had a very, I guess, life changing experience. Maybe 2018, I was in Virginia for about 2 months, like just after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville that started off. And I was in Richmond, which I didn't know till I went there was the capital of the southern states in the Civil War. But so there's like it was like I learned so much, and also as like my mom is Caribbean, and so that's like a different history than African American, and I learned so much about uh, what it means to be African American in America, and particularly in the South. I mean, that's like the north of the South, but still. Um, and after that experience, I really started to feel a lot more responsibility, I think, to help us do better. Like us. I mean, and I really try to be inclusive when I say this because I think that narratives can get shifted like you white people are doing this and like weird, which is even to what degree it's true, not helpful because we all have prejudice, all of us, including myself, and we all I mean, I don't think I know anybody who couldn't be doing better. I think that the difference is between the people who know that they could be doing better and want to be doing better and the people who are unaware that they could be doing better. To me, that's the difference I see. But so, I just have felt I never would have thought of myself as wanting to do, wanting to be involved in social change and wanting to sort of be involved in anything that was remotely similar to activism. I never thought of myself that way, but now this does feel very personal to me, and I feel so fortunate, I think, to have an opportunity to do something which helps people to do better, as for me as myself, but also for other people who are trying to do this work and sometimes doing it really well and sometimes struggling to get it going. To me, that is so meaningful to have an opportunity to help those people and for us to do it together.
Yeah, I hear that, and I think that's a big piece I've learned through the reconciliation journey that Pacific Opera is engaged in the building of relationships and just starting to work together. And absolutely, the sense of you did that and I did this doesn't help us move forward as much as we have the truth part that we need to sit with.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting, a project like this, because it helps all of us move forward and actually, yeah, build relationships, make a bigger community,
Uh-huh.
and see those people who I think have been, composing and writing music in a parallel universe because of just how the doors have felt closed or have been closed.
Well, and I will just say on the you did that and I did this, I think it's important to be clear too. I understand I that's not actually a critique of people who say that or people who feel that way because, if people who are who are actively being oppressed, people who have like generational trauma, like there's all sorts of reasonable reasons to feel that way. And so I just want to be really clear. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's not the end goal yet. And I am very privileged to, even though I'm a BIPOC person, to have grown up with a very small degree of that sort of generational trauma and that sense of oppression in my life. So, I'm maybe it's just easier for me than for some other people.
Well, I love this project. I'm so grateful that you've undertaken it. My closing question has to be, what is the big vision of the future? Like, what is your goal for the project? Do you have a sense of where you would like to see it, even in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, the goal of the project can be summed up really simply. It's that no reasonable person could say it's difficult to program this work. Um, the
That's a
details
great
of that are
goal.
going to look different, but that's just very simply the goal is that now it's hard and I get it. And when until it's easy for anybody to do, like we're still going to be spinning our wheels trying to generate momentum on this front.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing some insight into this project. I hope that we've encouraged people to share their resources and for sharing some of your own personal history and journey. I think it's helpful for people to hear individual stories to understand the broader context often of what we read in the news. And so it's so helpful just to hear from you directly. You can make your last shout out for the website. This is probably a good time to say, where can we find it? What
Yeah,
is that
exactly.
web
Well, I
address
mean,
again?
thanks so much for having me here, Rebecca, for inviting me and giving me a chance to talk about the work that I and my partners have been doing. If you're interested, please go check out the website www.morebipocvoices.com. Um, whether you know of a composer or work that you'd like to contribute, if you have any feedback about the project, if you have questions about the project, if you um, any sort, if you want to know more about like when things are going to be ready or anything like that, I'd love to get in touch, because one of the things that I'm really trying to do right now is to listen to as many people in the industry as possible. This project has nothing to do with me personally and my views. I'm just somebody who's had an opportunity to start working on it. So if you have opinions or you have things you want to share, you can get in touch with me through the website, and I would love to hear from you and just know what your journey or your position with this work is, and how that's going for you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm hoping that you're going to have a great influx from this. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you today. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks so much, Rebecca.